All right, so the UK government just dropped its 2025 budget. Now, this isn't just a bunch of numbers. It's a plan that's going to shape the country for years to come. And honestly, it's a bit of a high-stakes gamble. So in this breakdown, we're going to get right into it. What's the strategy? What are the trade-offs? And what's this huge economic bet they're making?
And really, it all comes down to this one massive question. You've got huge pressure to pay for things we all rely on, like schools and hospitals. But at the same time, there's this big promise to cut the nation's debt. So how do you do both? That's the tightrope they're trying to walk, and it's the core problem this whole budget is built around.
So, when we talk about walking that fiscal tightrope, what does it actually mean? Well, to really get a grip on the choices being made here, you've got to understand just how narrow that path is. This isn't about what they want to do necessarily. It's about what they feel they have to do because of some pretty tough rules they've set for themselves.
Okay, so what are these big rules? Well, there are two of them, and they are absolutely central to this whole thing. Rule number one, the government can't just borrow money to pay for day-to-day stuff like public sector salaries. That has to come from taxes. And rule number two, the nation's overall debt has to be shrinking, or at least on a clear path to shrinking. You put those two rules together, and suddenly they shape every single decision in this budget.
So you've got these really tight rules boxing them in. What's the escape plan? Well, the government's strategy basically breaks down into three simple steps. I like to think of it as protect, squeeze, and defer.
Okay, let's break that down. First up is protect. This one's a no-brainer politically. You have to protect the big popular areas like the NHS, schools, and defense. But because you're spending more there, you have to find savings somewhere else. That brings us to step two, squeeze. This means most other government departments get hit with what are called real terms cuts. Basically, their budgets don't go up as fast as prices do, so year after year they can afford less. And then, to make all the numbers add up, you get to the final, crucial step, defer. This is the part where you push the really painful stuff, like big tax rises, into the future, well after the next election.
So let's look at that squeeze a bit closer. The government is counting on making public services way more efficient. We're talking about a target of finding almost £14 billion in savings every single year by 2029. Now, the idea is simple, right? Get more done with less money. But as you can imagine, actually pulling that off in the real world, well, that's where things get tricky.
But even if they find all those savings, it's still not enough to balance the books. And this is where that defer part of the plan really kicks in. To make the math work, the budget is banking on a whopping £26 billion from tax increases down the line. We're talking about hikes that are scheduled to happen after the current political cycle.
Okay, so you've got this strategy of protect, squeeze, and defer. And it's really important to get this. This isn't just some clever accounting. This is a plan that over a number of years fundamentally reshapes what the British state is, what it prioritizes, and where all that taxpayer money actually ends up.
And wow, I mean, just look at this chart. It really shows you this seismic shift in priorities we're talking about. The plan is for healthcare to swallow up almost half of all day-to-day government spending by 2029. To put that in perspective, back in 2009, it was only about a third. So yeah, this isn't just tweaking the numbers. This is a huge statement about what the state is for. It's becoming the national health service with a country attached.
And if that chart showed the big picture, this table shows the brutal, real-world consequences. It's a story of winners and losers. Since 2010, per-person funding for health is on track to be up by over a third. That's a huge increase. But look at the other side of the coin. Justice? Down 16%. And housing and communities plan to be cut by a massive 50%. I mean, cut in half. These are the trade-offs. This is what protect and squeeze looks like on paper.
So, the big takeaway here? This budget really cements a historic change that's been happening for years. After all the austerity and crisis spending, the state is being reshaped. It's becoming, first and foremost, a national health provider, with everything else kind of tacked on the side.
But here's the billion-dollar question, or maybe the multi-billion-pound question. Is any of this actually realistic? Because independent experts have been poring over these numbers, and let's just say, they're raising some pretty serious red flags about whether this plan can actually be delivered.
And this quote right here, spend now, pay later, it just hits the nail on the head. It comes from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, or the IFS. They're basically the UK's top independent watchdog for the government's finances, and this simple phrase perfectly sums up their main criticism of this whole budget.
So yeah, you can think of organizations like the IFS as a referee.
calling out the fouls in the government's financial game plan. And the big foul they're calling here is the timing. They're pointing out that all the good stuff, the spending, is happening right now. But all the hard stuff, the painful tax rises and the deep spending cuts to pay for it all, that's been kicked way down the road.
And when you dig into their criticisms, a few key things really stand out. First, they're asking, are these future spending cuts even believable? It's easy to write them down in a spreadsheet, but it's a whole different ballgame to actually implement them politically. Second, the whole plan leans really heavily on these tax hikes that are scheduled for the future, which a new government could just decide to cancel. And maybe most surprisingly, for a budget that's all about cutting debt, borrowing is actually forecast to be higher than we thought for the next 4 years. It only just squeaks into falling debt territory right at the very, very end of the plan.
So, when you step back and look at the whole picture, you realize this budget is so much more than just an accounting document. It's a huge, high-stakes bet, a bet on the future of the UK economy, and maybe even more so, a bet on the political courage of whoever is in charge a few years from now.
So it really boils down to two completely different ways of looking at this. On one side, you have the government's view. They're saying this is a responsible plan, we're cutting debt, we're investing in growth, and we're protecting the services you care about. But on the other side, you have the critics. They're looking at the same numbers and saying, nope, this is a risky gamble. You're just promising future pain to pay for today's spending, and there's a really good chance this whole plan will fall apart and have to be rewritten.
And that really is the heart of the matter, isn't it? For this whole thing to work, two big things have to happen. First, the economy needs to grow just like the forecasts say it will. And second, the politicians of the future have to be willing and able to push through some seriously unpopular tax hikes and spending cuts. And let's be honest, both of those are pretty big ifs.
So, in the end, a choice has definitely been made. The government is placing its bet. They're prioritizing spending now, and they're banking on a combination of future growth and some tough medicine later on to make it all work. The multi-billion-pound question that we're all left with is pretty simple. Will that bet actually pay off?